It's my pleasure to introduce our next presentation, our next speaker, Dr. Rostyslav Melnykiv, who is Professor of Ukrainian Literature and Journalism at the HS Skovoroda Kharkiv National Pedagogical University. And his presentation this morning, or this evening for some of us, is entitled The Godfather of the Red Renaissance, Serhiy Pylypenko. So please, Dr. Melnykiv, the floor is yours.
In the list of the pioneers of Soviet literature, as well as in the digits of the phalanx of the singers of the new era of the creators of Red Renaissance, and finally of the poets of the executed Renaissance, the name of one of the most outstanding personalities of the time, Serhiy Pylypenko, is usually mentioned only casually and even with a negative implication, especially in the last decades, primarily because of his opposition to Mykola Hrylovy during the literary discussion of 1925-1920 years old. In fact, and 28 years, sorry. In fact, this is also the principal justification for not including this writer in the anthology Executed Renaissance, one of the most representative anthologies in the portrayal of the 1920s, published in 1958 in Immigration by Yuri Lavrinenko. Pylypenko's pupil and compiler seems to suggest additional arguments, giving him a damaging characterization. He calls him an unhappy pseudo-theorist from the pseudo-writers organization Plugh. He does, however, recognize him as a first-rank organizer, thanks to whose efforts publishing house grew, providing the public with a systematic book and magazine production. It is interesting that Ukrainian scholars also think within the same cliché. As Alexander Mukomela noted, in 1992, contemporary literary critics and cultural experts mostly mentioned the name of Serhiy Pylypenko as a founder of Plugh with his Marxism, and evaluate the significance of this organization and its leader only one-sidedly, without taking into consideration the social, political, and spiritual realia of Ukrainian culture of that time. Among the factors that contribute to the establishment of such stereotypical perception of Pylypenko are the modern and complex scholarly studies of the literary process of the 1920s by Miroslav Shkandriy, 1992, and Solomia Pavlychko, 1997. Despite this author's intention to prejudice and objective, the sympathy for the adherents of modernity and Europeanism often distort the role and the significance of Serhiy Pylypenko in the Ukrainian cultural progress. In fact, Shkandriy, in the conclusion to his study, underlines the duel between Hrylovy and Pylypenko may be interpreted as a conflict between two strategies of the mass movement development. Pylypenko was making peasants into Ukrainians. Hrylovy was transforming Ukrainians into intellectuals. That is why the conflict lay actually in tactics. Hrylovy, Blakitny, Pylypenko, and other strugglers were rather united than separated. This statement supports the thesis suggested by Yuri Shevelyov, characterizing the essence of the discussion in the context of the peculiarities of Ukrainian literary development. He wrote then, in those historical conditions, the principal problem was in the very way of preserving Ukrainian original culture and a unique Ukrainian identity in general, which were in danger. Regardless of their tactics, all of the opponents in this conflict, except for a few time servers, had a common desire to save this identity and originality. From this point of view, the sworn enemies, the Olympian Hrylovy and the Massovist Serhiy Pylypenko, belonged to the same camp, and the NKVD understood the matter in these terms when it started annihilation both Hrylovy and Pylypenko with their followers and supporters. Objectively, they were the very people standing at forefront of the literary process of the 1920s, which resulted in the incredible development of Ukrainian culture and the spiritual renewal of the nation with its new center in Kharkiv. It's remarkable that the chronological limits of this short and surprisingly bright epoch in the history of our literature coincide with the Kharkiv period in the life of the two writers, thought for both of them. This period ended tragically. Serhiy committed suicide and Pylypenko was arrested and executed. Actually, Serhiy Pylypenko spent his first and last days in the capital of Slobozhanщина in prison, and during the 13 years between these arrests and reached his peak as a journalist, as a writer, and an administrator and organizer of literary process. On November 17, 1920, Serhiy Pylypenko arrived in Kharkiv as a delegate of the Fifth All-Ukrainian Conference of Communist Party Bolsheviks of Ukraine, at the end of which he arrested by the local department of the ЧК, All-Russian Extraordinary Commission. The biography of this 29 years old prisoner was rather striking. At the age of 14, Pylypenko began to take part in the revolutionary movement, and in 1908 he became a member of Socialist Revolutionist Party. Such an early political activity was in great measure conditioned by the influence of his father, who was a teacher and followed the beliefs of the Narodna Voля, people's freedom. The future writer was born in 1891 in Kyiv in the family of Poltava Cossacks. Because of political disloyalty, Pylypenko's father often had to change jobs, which had a negative influence on the family financial fortunes. That is why Serhiy Pylypenko had to work in various artels on the family, namely, he was a apprentice in bindery, in a cart workshop, and for carpenter. He worked at a navy as a haymaker and as foreman. At the same time, he attended a classical school at public expense due to his poverty and good grades. Under influence of the work by Drahomanov, Pylypenko enters the Slavonic branch of the Historical Philological Department of Kyiv University, where he studied Greek, Latin, as well as French, Italian, Czech, Polish, and Serbian. He also pays much attention to studying Ukrainian language and literature. Pylypenko planned to write thesis, but because of his party activity in 1912, he was expelled from the university in his third year. A police investigation did not find sufficient evidence, so punishment was lenient and limited to prohibition of residence in Kyiv. Thus, the future writer continued his father's work. He taught history, language, logic, and psychology first at Barishvili Higher Basic School, and later he teaches seminaries and secondary schools. With the beginning of World War I, Pylypenko goes to the front as a volunteer on the instruction of the leaders of the socialist revolutionaries. Fighting in the 21st Army Corps, Serhiy Pylypenko climbs all the ranks of career ladder, from private to staff captain and then battalion commander. He becomes a personal nobleman, the same as his father once became. For his military deeds, Pylypenko was decorated with the Order of St. Anne and the Order of St. Vladimir, as well as with all subaltern officer award. He was thrice wounded and twice shell-shocked in the war. In the first days of the February Revolution, he takes part in the activity of soldiers' councils and is elected to regimental, divisional, and army councils. He also becomes of the leaders of the Ukrainian movement, of the 12th Army, and of the Northern Front in general. During this period, Pylypenko acquires editorial experience. In Riga, he publishes a front newspaper, Ukrainский голос, Ukrainian Voice, which supported the policy of the Central Rada. After the October Revolution, Pylypenko, the commissar of the 152nd Regiment and the 33rd Division, still remains a member of the Socialist Revolutionary Fraction in the soldier committees of the army and at the front. After the demobilization in January of 1918, Serhiy Pylypenko comes back to Kyiv and briefly becomes active in political life there, mainly as the editor of the most widely read newspaper Narodna Volya, People's Freedom, the circulation of which reached 200,000 copies. This publication of the All Ukrainian Peasant Union and the Central Cooperative Committee was in opposition to the government of Hetman Petro Skoropadsky, so Pylypenko was arrested and imprisoned for 3 months during the Hetmanate. Later, he renews his active political work. In autumn of 1918, Pylypenko becomes a member of the Central Committee of the Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionary Party. He takes part in the preparation of the Congress of the Working People of Ukraine, the first session of which took place on the 23-28 of January in the 1919. Among the resolution of this session is the confirmation of the Act of Reunion of the Western and the Eastern lands and proclamation of the single united Ukrainian People's Republic. However, pneumonia prevents Pylypenko from attending this Congress. And on the 5th of February, Kyiv is already occupied by the Red Army. In the new political conditions, Pylypenko publicly renounces his membership in the Ukrainian Party of Socialist Revolutionaries, and in March of 1919, he joins the Communist Party Bolshevik of Ukraine. At this time, he has the editorial staff of Party and Soviet edition. He works in editorial section of the Vsevedal, and he manages the publishing house Cosmos. During the hasty retreat of the Red Army under pressure from Denikin's troops, Pylypenko decides not to leave Ukraine. Holding the position of the post commander of Chernihiv, Pylypenko, on his own initiative, forms a partisan unit. Action in the areas of Kyiv and Zhytomyr, Serhiy Pylypenko held joint military operation with his former party mate, Socialist Revolutionary Nesmiyanov, during a fortnight trying to reach the south and to get to Makhno. This forced alliance later became a formal charge and the chief accusation against Pylypenko by Kharkiv official of the Cheka. According to the state political directorate, at this time, Pylypenko joined the Volhynia Brigade of Petlura and was assigned to a communication squad. However, this military unit, headed by Omelian Volov, moved at that moment from under the command of Головний Supreme Ottoman Simon Petlura to the command to the Central Committee of the Ukrainian Communist Party, left wing of the Borodbist. It is also known that Pylypenko had been held captive, but he managed to organize an escape and suffered another stealth shock. At the end of the 1990s, Serhiy Pylypenko comes back to Kyiv and edits the newspaper Bolshevik. In his journalist materials, he tends to defend democratic principles in the establishment of Soviet rule and pays special attention to the role of the Ukrainian peasantry and its significance in the future social political system. This theme was actually the dominant one in Pylypenko's journalistic work, as shown by his later publication covering the famine of the 1920 and the protection of peasants' rights and his criticism of administrative methods in the management of rural economic processes. Meanwhile, in the spring of 1920, another round of military action begins. The military forces of Poland and of the Ukrainian People's Republic advance from the west and the forces of the White Guardists from south. The editorial staff of Bolshevik is evacuated to Cherkasy, and the main editor of the newspaper is sent to command an infantry brigade of the 13th Army. After the retaking of Kyiv by the Bolsheviks, however, he recalled from the front for the local Kyiv Revolutionary Committee organization. First, he works for some time in the party apparatus, but later he again gets absorbed by journalistic work and editing. At the time, Pylypenko draws closer to Georgy Lapchinsky and Yevhen Kasyanenko, who protect the ideas of federalization of Ukrainian-Russian relations and at the level of party organization as well as at the level of national economy. These party figures emphasized the significance of the national issue in Ukraine and sharply protested against its neglect by the Bolsheviks. They also wanted to create a new Communist Party of Ukraine, which would become a completely independent organization and a section of International. But the point that seemed most blameworthy to Moscow Party chairman was the advocacy for the creation of separate Ukrainian army units and the defense of Ukrainian economic independence. These questions were very acute at the fifth All-Ukrainian Conference of the Communist Party Bolsheviks of Ukraine, which took place in Kharkiv on November 1722, 1920 year. In the process of the discussions, Serhiy Pylypenko upheld the principles of the Federalists. As Mukomela points out, this was the main reason for arrest of Pylypenko, which was made on the direction of Rakovsky and Manuilsky. As a result of this investigation, Pylypenko was prohibited from holding a responsible post for a period of 6 months. That was how the Kharkiv period in the writer's life began. Later he wrote, I recollect how I worked as a laborer at the plant Serhiy Molot in Kharkiv in 1921. Every day I had to walk 12 kilometers, and on days when we had party meetings, even 24. I get as much as 100 karbovancy a week, which was only enough to buy a bit more than 3 pounds of bread. Consequently, I fell ill with scurvy, but those were Soviet times. There was a very friendly team, the party, that prevented me from dying. I had an average level education, which allowed me to write notes about the plant and publish them with the help of the blockading in the newspaper Visty. When I got to the hospital with my injured leg, by also I did not have to look for a job. I was made an editor of the Selyanska Pravda, the peasant's trust, and started publishing in it my fables that late comprised the Baikivnitsia. That was in 1921. Among the contributors to Selyanska Pravda, we meet such names as Andrei Panev, Petro Panch, and Ivan Stenchenko. The responsible secretary of the newspaper was Pavlo Gubenko, Stapishnya. Rather often, when Vasily Elan's blockading condition became aggravated, Serhiy Pylypenko had also to fulfill the duties of the editor of the newspaper Visty. The editorial office of this newspaper was situated only one level up and included Mikey Hansen, Volodymyr Koryak, Mykola Khvylyovy. These two groups of writers actually were the core of Kharkiv cultural life. It is thanks to their efforts that such literary Michelins as Naspola, Alarm, and Shtabel, Stek appear, and the journal Shahim Estetza, The Path of Art, is founded. Moreover, the work of publishing house become normalized, and these separate literary phenomena come together to build the Ukrainian national literary movement. The last fact was contrary to the views of the political commissars of culture in Moscow, who were chauvinistically disposed leaders of the local prolet cult, proletarian culture. Thus, Ukrainian-Russian confrontation on this issue becomes more acute, which becomes especially clear with the organizational formation of the Ukrainian literary movement. Fulfilling the resolution of the Central Committee of the Communist Party Bolshevik of Ukraine about the necessity of organizing the power of peasant writers, the plenary session of the All-Ukrainian Organization Bureau of the Prolet Cult on the 13th of March tasked Pylypenko with the creation of Peasant Writers Union. In short time, In a short time, on 3rd of April, the statutes of the newly created organization Plug were affirmed at a meeting of the board of the artistic sector of Golupolita Svita, the main department of political education. This organization had a unit the dispersed revolutionary creative forces of peasant writers all over Ukraine and work with the broad masses of the peasantry. The statutes of Plug were soon published in a peasant fortnightly newspaper of Golupolita Svita of the Soviet Ukraine with the same name, Plug. Such organizational efficiently provoked proletariat leaders on hidden irritation. At the official meeting of the Central Committee of this organization, its actual chairman, Zakhar Nevsky, stated that literary section of Golupolita Svita are just gathering of Ukrainian swindlers. In its turn, start statement gave Pylypenko and the landlord reasons to demonstratively leave proletariat at the plenary session of the All-Ukrainian Org-Bureau on May 14, 1922. They were followed by Volodymyr Koryak and Volodymyr Sosura. As a result of such démarche, that is, that all Ukrainian elements left the organization. Proletariat soon lost its position in the cultural life of Soviet Ukraine, and soon its existence became absolutely senseless. With the creation of Plug, Ukrainian writers were organizationally united on a professional basis for the first time. According to its platform, it was not artistic or aesthetic principles that were moved to the foreground. The initial task was the creation of a new working peasant literature. That is way public and civil, but not corporative interests should direct the activity of all the union. The very first months of activity of this organization proved that it was not only timely, but utterly essential for meeting the needs of the rural cultural education movement, which acquired a strong national character during the years of liberation struggles thanks to the activity of the establishments of Prosvita. Plug developed on the groundwork prepared by Prosvita, and the activities soon covered Kongrad, now Krasnograd, Valky, Lubny, Kyiv region, Poltava region, and one branch even started working in Kursk. As mentioned in the chronicle of the magazine Шляхи мистецтва, from the report and date of local organization, one can notice the great interest writers have in the union. The agitated element of revolutionary peasant creativity look for an outlet and organizational forms. Many letters with attached biographies, works of literature, and application to organization were sent to the Bureau of the Union from all the corners of the country. Almost every week, new writers would come to Kharkiv from villages to ask for advice, directions, and friendly criticism. They would look to appropriate literature, get acquainted with the quality of contemporary writing, with the writers themselves, and then go back to their villages as organizer of new branches of Plug. Thus, Plug briefly becomes the most popular literary organization in Ukraine. The possibility of both collective and individual membership played an important role in the popularity of the organization. So too did the directive to cooperate with Selbut House of Culture, which replaced Prosvitas. Answering reproaches about the educationalism and massism of the peasant writers' union, Serhiy Pylypenko, as the constant leader, stated, "Our organization must be a mass organization, that is, must be closely connected with our writers' reserves, with numerous literary studios, with the best organization of readers, and it must be the first filter for young beginners in writing. This would explain the main significance of Plukh for Ukrainian literature in the 20th century, as it not only gave birth to a cluster of five-class writer, but also to many people mesmerized by the artistic world, whose love of literature became rich soil for the next generation of Ukrainian writers. The work of the Union included work with creative youth. It publishes a series of popular fiction such as The Peasant Library and Joyful Book. It popularizes Ukrainian writers, regardless of the grouping they belonged to or whose opponents they were. It was the quality of the text that had the main value for the members of Plukh. At least the advertising pages and the names of the authors in Plukh editions show that. The literary discussion of 1925-1928, which separated Pylypenko and Serhiy, negatively influenced the activity of Peasant Writers Union. Its members moved to Vaplite, the Free Academy of Proletarian Literature, and WUZ of Ukrainian Union of Proletarian Writers, and formed two of such organizations as Молодняк, Young People, and Західна Україна, Western Ukraine. Thus, the union membership fell from 230 to 80. And by 1930, this number decreased to 47. Numerous branches with hundreds of literary studios were closed. Raising the national conscience of Ukrainian people through literature was absolutely incompatible with the plans of the Communist Party. Party leaders turned purely literary discussion into something analogous to the political debate which was taking place in the party between Trotsky, Zinoviev, Bukharin, and Stalin. So-called democracy changed into party centralization, and the totalitarian regime established in 1929 demolished any opportunities of recreation and artistic realization, especially in Ukraine. Provoked by the party, Serhiy Pylypenko stated, just as the year 1925 will stay in the history of the Communist Party as the year of an unprecedented discussion, the basis of which comprises the prospects lost by some party members. The same is true in the history of the Ukrainian literature movement. 1925 year was the time of heated literary discussion, the basis of which consists of almost the same deviations and the same illness that should be promptly cured. In the polemics of that time, the position of Plukh members expressed mainly by Pylypenko was rather reasonable. We should be guided neither by Europe nor by Prosvita. The whole problem itself is set up wrong, as it does not contain the name of the main engine of Soviet culture, the name of the builders of socialism, the proletarian people accompanied by the revolutionary peasantry. We should be guided first of all by the creativity of peasants and workers. We should foster their development and help them to win hegemony of the cultural artistic front as well as on all other. The basic artistic and aesthetic principles of such creativity should sorry. The basic artistic and aesthetic principles of such creativity should be put ahead of literature experience. However, as it was declared in the platform of Plukh, I did not presuppose development of the forms that earlier existed in bourgeois literature or transforming those forms to contemporary post-revolutionary literature, but included finding new principles and types of forms through practical mastering of the old literary forms and their renewal in a new class content. Unlike Vaplite, confined itself only the declaration to the declaration, Proprietor found its creative work on the basis of Marxism, of a Marxist mindset, and the main postulates of the Communist Party, giving its member the right to use all the devices, literary forms, including those that were already used as well as absolutely new ones. The platform of Plugh contained prices demands about our work of literature. Plugh tries to cultivate in its production a single and solid image which dynamically adheres to its social content and needed fulfill the main objectives of art. Sorry. Simultaneously, Plugh has to avoid scattered images of mosaic ornamentation, which distract attention and which became ends in themselves in so-called imagistic works of literature. The rhythm of composition should also be solid and developed dynamically, dependent on the plot and its twists and turns realized in that single image. Thus, Plugh rejects rhythm and aim as in sometimes viewed by futurists, which result as purely verbal and senseless exercise. Finally, one should not attach too much importance to sound elements in literary piece, do symbolistic melodies and other bred mainly by mysticism. We should long for harmonic combination of sound elements with artistic images and rhythms, connecting everything in the tempo appropriate to the action that is the content. This is the way in which the demands to the works of literature aimed to spread the principal ideas among the politic at large were outlined. Thus, the chief criteria was readability, and this is very important, taking into consideration the goal defined for Ukrainian culture and its creators in general, that is formation of monolithic, monolingual, and full-grown nation. Serhiy Pylypenko emphasized, we have a great task of the Ukrainization of the proletariat in Ukraine. And make no mistake, the Ukrainization of the proletariat, which we have already begun, will be actively advanced until this word combination stop frightening. And anyone and everybody understands that this process is necessary and inevitable. This statement resulted in special demands on books and their readability. We ought to store up enough rye bread, he wrote, to provide workers and not to tinker too much with this readability, and not to be afraid that those works will sting Grinchenko. Certainly, from no formal but not ideological point of view, we should not be afraid as the lower mass of workers has not moved forward much culturally from Grinchenko's time and does not have taste of croissant yet. What about satisfying the cultural needs of qualified readers? This can be achieved through good Ukrainian translation of works of high art. But according to Pylypenko, this was secondary question. It was in the background, because first of all, we should take into consideration workers and peasants and feed them with the usual rye bread. And Plugh has to some extent charged itself with this task. From this aspect, members of this literary organization led by Pylypenko, as well as a writer grouping, stood on virgin soil. Ukraine needed a readable mass market book, and it was an essential part of the development of a full-fledged literature. Plugh members understood this quite well. So too did their opponents from Vaplita. For instance, Alexis Listarenko, Mike Johans, and Yuri Smolich actively worked in this direction. and even extravagant representatives of Nova Generatia, new generation, with they seeking for a new language, compositional experiments, and protecting the literature of fact and other types of functional literature. In his own artistic work, Serhiy Pylypenko tried as much as he could to abide by the declared demands of transparency and clarity of the text for as many people as possible. So it is not surprising that the fable becomes his favorite genre. He tries to adjust his ancient and immortal form to our circumstance and to refill this form with new content. But the author did not neglect the formal side as well in the prefers to his translator of fables of Ivan Batrak. He stated, why could not a fable have the form of a song? Or why could not it be arranged in strict stanzas? Why could not it be written down as vers libre? The essence of the fable would not change. Finally, as Ivan Senchenko mentioned, the fable attracted Pylypenko because of his journalistic activity, as he, the same as Blakitny, at once understood that this genre is the most suitable for everyday newspaper work. The very first of Pylypenko attempts in this genre were highly valued by Alexander Oles, who helped Pylypenko by publishing his fable Volley Oxen in the newspaper Vidrochenya Renaissance. From that time, 1918 onward, Pylypenko positioned himself in the literary process mainly as a fabulist. Pylypenko's fables, wrote Johansen in his review of Pylypenko first fable collection, Байківниця чверть копи байок, a collection of fables, a quarter bushel of fables, which was published in 1922, said itself two interesting tasks. Firstly, it is an attempt to operate with an absolutely new kind of fable plot. The plots of Байківниця have nothing to do with traditional Aesopian fables. Sorry. And secondly, is the first attempt in the Ukrainian language and to organize proletarian consciences with a fable. Concerning the first task was fully accomplished by the author. Concerning the second, a wide variety of conception peculiar to fables lead the author to give the fables expressive conclusions, morals, sometimes too expressive. That is the educational intention of the author is probably too obvious. Still, the author has managed to present several fables that do not need morals at all, as the plot itself leads as audience to the right conclusions. Such fables as Puga, Erod, Pожежа, Fire, and other could have become a great adornment of any text book in a Soviet school. Actually, Pylypenko was aware of the ambiguous attitude to fables in the 20th century. That is why his book of fables in 1927 began with a rhetorical address to the reader «Старай байківниця» Old Fables. Побачиш байківницю, ти не кажи дурницю, або пригадай, мій любий, як кажуть старі люди, співай пісень не вмію, кажи байки не смію, чого ж воно то так, прокинувся той ляк. When you seek a collection of fables, do not call it nonsense and try to remember what old people say. Simpson, I can't tell you a fable, I don't dare, but why are you scared? So scared. The transparent traditional allegoricalness of Pylypenko fables is capable of delivering meaning and influencing purely educated and illiterate citizens, thus influencing their worldview. This was one of the writer's explicit goals. In this respect, the value of fables is much higher than that of a literal or detailed report. So despite the express didactism of Pylypenko fables and their association with a certain social political moment in the country life, Pylypenko innovate approach and unexpected viewpoint make his fables attractive for a reader. For instance, Ganda and a swallow mandate, etc. It should be emphasized that as a fabulist, Pylypenko paid attention not only to thematic topically, but he also tried to show new plot collisions and familiar everyday material. Nevertheless, is the author prose works that seem to have the greatest value in his literary heritage. From this point of view, it is interesting to read Ivan Senchenko's reasoning about Pylypenko's literary work. Sometimes he wrote stories, and he did it modestly. He did not bring them out to popular media, but wrote them quietly at home, then took this material and publishing house where it was published, as it seems to me, also quality without sensation. So maybe Pylypenko really was a mediocre prose writer, and his main vocation was writing fables? Absolutely not. It is typical case of turning the primary skills into secondary one. 2 years ago, when Pylypenko's thin book was published, I started rereading it and was surprised to discover such a thing. In the literature of 1920s, Pylypenko prose should stand together with the works of such outstanding writers as Dniprovsky, Kosynka, Slisarenko, Dosvitny. As a prose writer, Pylypenko made his debut in 1922. His stories first appeared in periodical, and in 1925 they were published as a separate book, Skalki Życia, Sprinters of Life. Also, the total output of Pylypenko's prose is not very large. He has about 15 prose collection to his credits. This is due to frequent reprinting of works and the peculiarity of his reworking of content. Early published works found a new place in a subsequent composition. Thus, the second supplement edition of the book "Тысячи одиниц," Thousands as Individuals, published in 1929, may be considered the most complete collection of stories by Pylypenko. This edition represented the whole spectrum of Pylypenko's prose, as Grigory Maifet mentioned in his review. From a small humoresque to typical short story, the impressionistic sketches which give the collection its title seems to outline themes for future stories. The critics considers them not as full-fledged stories, but as potential themes or undeveloped plots, speaking in terms of music preludes, thought not musical but literary. On the other hand, considering the fact that this was the first published prose piece by the author. This short piece underlined Pylypenko's intention to write for the people and about the people, since there were many thousands and many individuals that reflected the lives of thousands. Everyone can read this book: a peasant, a laborer, a student, and a refined reader, the Soviet intellectual. This is what Oladin said about the first edition. Few contemporary authors have such talent. Either they provide a reader with pieces of literature full of deep psychological shades, unreadable for lower class masses, or with primitive works for peasants that are boring for intellectuals. In this book, reader will find ordinary healthy people, an interesting topic, and unexpected twists and turns of plot. In his creative work, Pylypenko tries to set an example for contemporary and readable literature, following the criteria of a literary work as they are declared in the platform of Pluh. Each of his stories has a single and solid image with its dynamic development and corresponding ideological accent and social content. Besides, the writer pays extremely careful attention to details and to the psychological motives of characters' action, which makes the reader pay attention to every teeny thing as if it were the key to the main intrigue. For example, friendly service, phantom. In addition, the writer keeps the reader in constant suspense, and one of the plot collisions often leads to development to the moment armored car shame. In discussion the formal aspect of Pylypenko prose works, my tends to regard them as short stories. Even primarily Even a preliminary examination to the style makes clear the presence of plot, which obliges the author to a well-grounded motivation, a strict composition, and finally a climax. In case of a humorous story, you have an adventure, a mistake, and a misunderstanding. In case of story with different stylistic coloring, you have an action, a murder, a punishment. That is Pylypenko literary form. Oladen points out of an example that the author followed whether deliberately or subconsciously. Serhiy Pylypenko is a Ukrainian O. Henry, and maybe the only one. The application should be deprived of this title. I do not mean that Pylypenko blindly follows O. Henry. Pylypenko short stories are constructed in his own new and unique way. The critic thinks that Pylypenko even possesses an advantage over the American writer. First, Pylypenko never uses O. Henry's favorite device all of a sudden, as all twists of the plot are logical and meet the principles of artistic trust. Secondly, Pylypenko's distinction from Henry is absence of nihilism. O. Henry's lack of ideology can be seen in all the works of this American writer. Pylypenko not only seeks a striking plot, but also healthy philosophy for the times.
Rostislav, I'm sorry for the interruption. I just want to note that we have about 10 minutes left and we want to leave some time for questions. So sorry, if you could finish up soon, that would be great.
Sorry. Okay. Okay. I'm continuing. A cycle of stories which may be convenient title from a military diary of 1916-17. Actually, this was the cycle added to the second edition of Thousand as Individuals has separate place in this book and in the writer legacy in general. The stories in Marsh, the island, Dreikreutzen, Fire Panic, Icebreaker indicate the appearance on a completely new quality in Pylypenko manner of writer. As Ivan Stanchenko observed, these stories about the things he knew best about the events of the war. The writer's brush is colorful, his detailed knowledge of the material is striking, as is also his ability to paint large pictures. It is strange that the content of Pylypenko's novels is sometimes deeply tragic, but the canvas as a whole is lit by the light and spirit with which great writers' souls invisibly irradiated. Actually, this genre mistake is not accident in this statement, as we deal with the other maturing for bigger prose format, a narrative that was never written. At least there is no evidence of it. Still, maybe novels were not timely for Pylypenko, considering the situation in Ukraine at that time. The year of great changes, 1929, really became a turning point in the life of the Ukrainian nation. It was a year of the beginning of the big catastrophe, which resulted into repression and terror. Special attention was paid to the Ukrainian Republic, considering its economic and geopolitical significance. It was extremely necessary for Stalin regime to unify and denationalization the population of Ukraine. Literature was given the role of the creating and ideological basis for this process, forming a single cultural space which was meant to be international and socialist in its sense and national by form. That was what Stalin emphasized in his talk with writers. Leonid Maximenko early remarks, these are the equation becomes discernible only now in verbatim, not edited report of Stalin meeting with a delegation of Ukrainian writers, which took place within the week of the Ukrainian literature on 12 February 1929. Simultaneously, the dictator had an opportunity to witness directly the expressly pro-Ukrainian position to interlocutors who represented the full spectrum of Ukrainian literature process, as evidenced by such names as Mykola Khlyovy, Ivan Mykytenko, Andrei Khvylya, and certainly Serhiy Pylypenko. The writers brought up the question of including Ukrainian ethnographic lands, Kursk, Voronezh, Kuban, into Ukrainian territory. They defended the identity of language for Eastern and Western Ukraine. They discussed the invalidity of a scornful attitude to Ukrainians and Ukrainian culture in response to Stalin prize of Bulgakov's Dni Turbinных. For Stalin, this was more than enough to conclude that Ukrainian writers are nationally aggressive and that the necessity to their suppression is obvious. And the only question was when. For Pylypenko, this end was in 1933 on November. Sorry for my bad English and very long presentation. I'm stupid and I can't
Rostislav, not at all. Not at all. This was a very, very interesting presentation. Thank you so much. I personally learned so much from your presentation, and it was really, really interesting. And I'm so glad that we have captured it on video so that we can return to it and share it with colleagues who weren't able to join us today. So thank you very much. A story with a tragic ending, but an important story nevertheless. I think we have time maybe for one quick question. Anyone who would like to ask Rostislav a question, please raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat. Yes, please, Dr. Maria Zubrycka.
Пані Марія, я так втомився, прошу українською.
Дуже дякую. Thank you very much for your beautiful presentation. I have a very quick and short question. Дуже швидке запитання. Переконаний комуніст Сергій Pylypenko висуває ініціативу латинізації українського алфавіту. Як на це відреагували в Москві? І як би ви пояснили його потребу? Чи це була дійсно потреба об'єднання всіх комуністів, чи це була маніфестація націоналізму? Що це було, Ростиславе? I will switch into English. Serhiy Pylypenko was initiator of Latinization of Ukrainian alphabet. And he treated this Latinization as a means of to unite people who could build a communism. I raise a question to Rostyslav, how he could interpret this initiative. It was manifestation of nationalism, or it was a means of to unite people for building communism globally.
Я дуже коротко. Тут це був 1923 рік, і була основна мотивація, що сьогодні ми починаємо творити нове українське мистецтво на нових засадах, і відповідно ми відмовляємося від свого минулого, і поки що нічого путнього у нас не написано українською мовою, є всі можливості перейти на латинку. І тут йшлося, власне, загальною тенденцією творення єдиного простору культурного з Європою. Це йшло від захоплення Пилипенком мовою есперанто. І він вважав, що якраз українська мова таким чином зможе тут вже функціонувати, українська культура функціонувати в загальному європейському контексті. І дуже якраз хороший час, більшість населення українського неграмотні, їм однаково буде якою мовою вчитись, латинкою вчити чи кирилицю вчити. Бібліотеки не сформовані, тобто ми все починаємо з нуля. І давайте одразу перейдемо в одному форматі з усім світом. Тобто це основний такий був його меседж. І врешті-решт він спрацював, бо і футуристи про це думали. Але ініціатива не була підтримана. Долучився до цієї ідеї Йогансен, який вже починав пропонувати варіант, якої саме латинки ми обираємо, скажімо, спираючись на досвід чехів, словаків, та цей варіант. І відбулася така коротенька дискусія, і все. Тобто після того вже до цього вже повернулися, коли у 28-му році, коли в Харкові зустрілися мовознавці з усієї України і Галичини в тому числі, і прийняли компромісний варіант правопису, який ввійшов в історію як Скрипниківка.
Дякую, дуже дякую. Дякую.
A wonderful question and a very interesting answer. It seems to me we could have an entire lecture on this one question. So I'll just briefly hit the highlights of what Professor Melnykiv answered, and that is that in 1923, when Pylypenko was a graduate student, it was then that he proposed the Latinization of the Ukrainian alphabet under the pretext that we're just now starting to build the Ukrainian culture. We're building libraries, we're building literacy amongst the peasantry, and having the Ukrainian language in Latin would help in these initiatives, and it would also help integrate Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian literature into the broader European context. This initiative was not supported by the party authorities, and it sort of fell apart. So sorry for a bad translation, but maybe you can add to.
Дякую, Саро. Я дуже перепрошую грамату за свою погану англійську, але думаю, хоч якось прочитаю лекцію і затягнув, не розрахував з часом. От, там ще було б багато цікавого матеріалу, але я бачу в вашій бібліотеці університетській є книжка вибраних творів Пилипенка, які я упорядковував, і там ця моя доповідь є українською мовою, і є ці фотографії. Тобто я був дуже втішений, що в моїй праці є в бібліотеці Індіанського університету.
That's wonderful. That your article is in our library, and I'm not at all surprised that it is. So wonderful. We will spread the word, and hopefully all learn more about Pylypenko and your wonderful work. I can also mention, Rostyslav, that Professor Shkandri is a big friend of Indiana University. He's been here several times, given lectures and keynotes. So it's wonderful to hear you cite his important work as well in your presentation.
Дякую. Ну, професор Шкандрій взагалі величина, я дуже пишаюся своїм знайомством з ним, і мені дуже добре, коли він приїжджає до Харкова, то він зі мною зустрічається, я тим дуже пишаюся.
Super. Okay, wonderful. So thank you for this wonderful afternoon of presentations. I saw Mykola Homanyuk was here. Mykola, I don't know if you are available to remind our colleagues about the meeting that the informal meeting that you are organizing for next Friday.
Yes, I just can confirm that we plan to next Friday, and I could be a moderator of our meeting. If you have some questions to each other, I ask you to prepare at advance.
Great, thank you. I think we have a bad connection, Mykola. But yes, so next Friday, January 27th at 5 p.m. Kyiv time, a meeting for just the fellows to discuss your experience in the IU Ukraine non-residential scholars program, any suggestions you would like to make, and just to have an informal conversation with the fellows only. So I won't be there, Svetlana won't be there, it will just be you all. And thank you very much, Mykola, for this idea and for volunteering to moderate that meeting. So hopefully all of you can make it. We will send an email reminder. We will use the same link that we've used for all of our research seminars. So it will be the same link next Friday for the informal meeting of the fellows.
Thank you.
So we are wishing all of you health and safety. Take care of yourselves, be safe, and we look forward to future conversations, and do be in touch with us if you need anything from the team here at Indiana University.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.